So let's welcome Paul Drexler to MarshStream. Thank you, Paul. How are you tonight?
I'm fine. Great.
Great to see you. Now, how does a fine man like you get into the crime business?
Well, when I was about 9, my Uncle Jack's 52 Buick was stolen in Weehawken, New Jersey, and used in a double gangland murder. And that obviously got my attention. My father had a kind of strange reaction to that. He said, there were 30 other cars on that street, but they chose your Uncle Jack's, as if there was a thing of great distinction. But that sort of got me interested, and I'm fascinated also by crime as a window into what else is going on. It's a way to look at history.
Very interesting. So you wrote this book, but what brought you? Tell me more. Tell me more. How did you become a writer? What was your trajectory? You said you worked with the police chief, San Francisco Police Department. How did this all come to? How did you find out about all these things? So, but first, tell us more about how you got here.
Well, it was about 1984. I wrote an article for the Chronicle, the Sunday, on crime in early San Francisco. And a few weeks later, I'm in a bookstore, and I opened this book by a guy named Kevin Mullen. And in the preface, he says, as Paul Drexler said in his article, and then he completely debunked everything I said, but I didn't care because he spelled my name right. And I called Kevin. Kevin was the retired deputy police chief, and we became good friends. And I started to work on some projects with Kevin. I also, with my wife, developed a game called SFP, Homicide, which was later used to teach accident investigation. So that's really, Kevin is probably the person who got me the most interested in it.
And did you do anything else? What other things were you doing?
Oh, before the crime?
Yes, before crime, before you got into crime.
Yes. I failed at everything else. No, I was a writer. I was also an instructional designer. So I would design these sophisticated simulations to teach things in business. And I was also the president of the Cisco Kid fan club.
What is the Cisco Kid fan club?
Well, the Cisco Kid was a very popular 1950s TV show. I'm shocked that you were not familiar with it.
I must be too young.
You must be too young, yes.
That must be it. I must be too young. So what does it mean? You started the fan club? You were ahead of it?
No, I was the president of one chapter.
The local chapter?
A very small chapter. The chapter was me.
Really?
I was the Cornell chapter, yes.
And Cisco Kid, was that a show about crime?
Well, sure, because any Western, he would have this buddy, Pancho, and they would ride across the desert, and they would solve crimes. Pancho is kind of like to Sherlock Holmes. He was like the Dr. Watson to Sherlock.
With all this interest, you could have become a policeman or a detective. How did you avoid that?
I don't know. I came out to San Francisco to start a very weird store that I had back east. And I thought it was one of the 3 cities that could possibly stomach it. And then I just stayed out here, and I started writing for a magazine called, now I've forgotten the name, Boulevards, that's it, right.
Boulevards?
Mm-hmm. It was kind of like a wet magazine, kind of like a hip, so to speak.
What was the store you brought here?
Which story?
The store, where you were on the
East Coast. Yes. It was on Noe Street. It was Noe right off of 16th Street. I had a number of clients, but very few of them had any money.
It's hard for a store keeper.
Yes. Well, I would sell Japanese space toys and atomic age furniture, which is like 1950s kind of stuff. And
You
just
mean like those white molded tables? Is
yeah,
that-
there was a wonderful TV set called The Predictor that was there was no frame around it. It was anyway. I would sell things like that, but it was difficult to get enough things, so I eventually went out of business.
I guess you would have had to go like become an alien or something and get it from off planet, perhaps.
It's true. It's true. And my spaceship was in the shop. So
Right. Where did you come from in the East Coast, being from the East Coast myself?
well, I was born in Brooklyn, and that's where I lived. And then went to college in Upper New York State.
Where?
I went to Cornell in Ithaca, and then I moved to Boston and lived there for 10 years. I had a couple of stores and various things like that. I actually, that's when I started collecting art. I would go to auctions every week, and I would start buying things that I couldn't put in any category. They would just, well, it's the term is so bad it's good. Shines and stinks like a rotten mackerel by moonlight might be a more literary way of saying it. And I developed this whole collection, and I used to show it. And then I thought, well, who might possibly fall for this? And I thought San Francisco, New York, or Los Angeles. And I picked San Francisco.
A good choice. A good choice. So when was it that you wrote your first crime story?
I think the first crime story actually was the one for the Chronicle about early crime in San Francisco. And there was a tremendous amount of early crime. I mean, this is a city founded in part by criminals. As Kenneth Rexroth said, San Francisco was settled mostly by gamblers, prostitutes, rascals, immigrants, and fortune seekers who came across the isthmus and around the Horn. And it's definitely true. It was Oscar Wilde would say, when someone disappears, they're always seen in San Francisco later on. And, it was a very good place to disappear, especially if you were wanted by the police, because it was a very prosperous town, not many cops. Anyway, so that's why they came. And then it was kind of like a United Nations of crime from Australia, from France, from all over the place. And it's always had that, the feeling, and San Francisco sort of goes back, if it wants to be the Paris of the West, the wide open town, and then every once in a while it's seized by its middle class people for a little while, and they straighten everything up, and then we get tired of them, and another crew comes in.
So tell me a little bit about the French and the Australian that came.
Yes. Actually, it's interesting. In the 1850s, the biggest minority in the city were the French. And that's because of the lottery of the golden ore. It's, discovery of gold was big news everywhere in the world. And the leaders of France at that time decided to get in on it. And they had this lottery. And it was like, you could buy a ticket for just 1 franc. And the prize was this huge hunk of gold. And they said what they were going to do with the money they raised was to bring 5,000 deserving poor from France to California so they could start a new life. And it was very successful. And then when it came to selecting the people, they went into the prisons and took the prostitutes, the pimps, and their political opponents and shipped them all over. And most of them came to San Francisco, where they fit right in. Australians, it was a prison colony, and again, they were very good sailors, and it just was a good place for them to come. And they actually had a place part of San Francisco which was called Sydney Town, because that's where they lived, and they'd come out and commit a few crimes and go back.
Which part was Sydney Town?
I was afraid you were going to ask me that. It was, I think it's maybe North Beach. And I mean, you know, you have to remember that a lot of the city didn't exist. And in fact, you know, in the early 1850s, the harbor was actually First Street and Market Street. So anyway, yes, the Australians came and led to all kinds of interesting situations.
Was there a wave after that of criminals that came? You said it would go back and forth. There would be criminals and then everything.
Yeah. And well, what happened after the Australians, and also a lot of people came, a lot of Irish came from New York, who had formerly been worked for Tammany Hall. They were, I guess you would call them 19th century political consultants. And their job as consultants was to physically prevent anyone they didn't like from getting to the polls. And then also voting 5 or 10 times. And then of course there was a reaction to that. The vigilance committees came in the early 1850s.
And what did they do? Did they immigrate? Vigilant committees immigrated?
No,
or
it was,
just arose?
You know, history is written by the winners. It depends who you believe. The standard history is that San Francisco is this big corrupt town, and the respectable people got fed up with it, and they took over the city, and they literally did. And they ran the city for 6 months or a year until it was sort of straightened out. Now, it also happened that these people are all middle-class Protestants, and the people that they threw out were Catholics. I'm sure that was just a complete coincidence, but it's something that could be considered.
Of course.
And then we had Italians came later. They actually, you know, the mafia really started in New Orleans.
It didn't start in Italy?
Well, yeah, if you're going to get technical about it. Yeah. But it really started in New Orleans, and then actually, and they shifted. A number of people came out to San Francisco. Actually, New Orleans and San Francisco have a lot in common. Jazz, you know, San Francisco was a real center of jazz in early 1900s, that and New Orleans. And because sin is very good for culture. You know, it just, all the elements at the bottom, no one cares, and they're free to be creative. It's kind of like tap dancing was invented in New York by the Irish and the African Americans. It's a combination of Irish clog dancing and other dancing. So that's, yeah.
Very amazing.
Yeah, there's a lot of information you don't need.
No, I like this. We like this information, Paul. I'm very interested in it, because pretty soon we're going to get to the crime part.
Okay. Well, I can say that two of the great entertainers of the early 20th century, Sophie Tucker and Al Jolson, both came out to San Francisco in about 1906, 1905, something like that. And what they learned, a lot of what they did later on, they learned in San Francisco.
Did they stay here?
For a few months.
And then they learned, and then they brought it around the world?
Yes, the kind of ragtime, some of that styling.
Mm-hmm.
They did that.
What an interesting amount of information you have, Mr. Drexler.
I know, my mind is just filled with it.
So tell us, you wrote this book. Tell us about how that all happened, how it came to be. You know, did you come up with the idea? Did somebody ask you to do it? How did it happen?
Well, I was writing, I had what was a great present, which was a deadline. I started writing a column for the Examiner. And so I would write a new story every 2 weeks. And then I thought, well, gee, I've gotten all these stories written. Maybe this could be a book. And a number of publishers disagreed, but I finally found one who liked it. And I took the articles and I stretched them, because you have kind of like 1,000-word limit when you're writing for a paper. And I took some of the more interesting ones in certain categories, and then I just wrote it over about a year.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you want to read us one right now?
That's possible, certainly.
Would you please?
Okay. Well, the book is divided into 6 chapters. Dangerous women, serial killers, purveyors of sin, con artists, masters of escape, and unsolved mysteries. Now, as San Franciscans, we can be justly proud of the quality of our serial killers. Earl Nelson terrified cities all over the US and Canada, and Alfred Klein had one of the strangest trials in US judicial history. And Richard Thorson hid 70 tons of armaments in his Pacific Heights mansion. And we're talking about the 1960s. So I want to talk a little bit about Alfred Klein. He was so clever. He was also known as the buttermilk Bluebeard. And he was so clever that police could never charge him with murder. So buttermilk is the new black. The ancient drink, which was originally a byproduct of making butter, is now a favorite of the artisanal milk crowd. It's high in protein, easy to digest, and a natural treatment against gastrointestinal ailments. All in all, quite a healthy drink, unless Alfred Klein prepared it. Klein, who was called a fiendish philanderer, poisoned as many as 11 people with buttermilk, but the police were never able to charge him with murder. He was born in the Bible Belt of Kansas. He married early, had 2 children, and gained a reputation as an upstanding farmer and a Sunday school teacher, choir member. But in 1929, he attempted to steal a rich woman's estate by forging her name on some legal documents. He was convicted of grand theft and sent to the Colorado prison. And when he emerged in 1930, he added a deadly twist to his forgery practice and began earning a lethal living. His new method went like this. 1, find a rich old widow and marry her. 2, take her to another state. 3, poison her with buttermilk in a hotel. And then would get the death certificate from the doctor. And the doctor who's going to come to a hotel is not going to be the greatest doctor in the world. And these are all old women. So the fact that they could have a heart attack was not that unusual. So he would get the death certificate. He would ship the body to another state and have it cremated, get rid of all the evidence. And then he would forge documents, collect her assets, and begin again. He met and charmed 75-year-old Laura Cummings in Los Angeles. They decided to take a trip up the Pacific coast. Somewhere along the way, Mrs. Cummings changed her will, leaving her $60,000 estate to Klein. She suddenly became ill in British Columbia and entered a hospital where they found and told her that she had been poisoned. By this time, Klein had decamped back to Los Angeles. Her attorneys convinced the reluctant Mrs. Cummings to destroy the new will. I hate to do it, she said. He's such a sweet man. So that's one of the serial killers. The other is con men. I always find con men fascinating. They're really like performance artists with larceny in their souls. They fascinate us with their ability to manipulate people, their colossal nerve and imagination, and their utter lack of scruples. Some of San Francisco's most imaginative and fascinating con artists have shown themselves to be masters of illusion, turning a 250-pound woman into a femme fatale, an Australian criminal into a royal physician, and a box of random wires into a powerful medical device said to diagnose and cure almost every disease. So whether posing as a successful miner, as a prosperous widow looking for matrimony, or as an aristocratic physician, they have separated us from our money with great aplomb. And I'm going to talk about Big Bertha, the confidence queen. Now, the term Big Bertha is used to describe the most spectacular example of a piece of equipment. So in World War I, Big Bertha was what these gigantic German cannons were called. Now today, Big Bertha is used to describe the world's largest earth-moving machine, capable of boring a hole 58 feet in diameter. But in the 19th century, Big Bertha described a person, a spectacular woman, capable of separating previously impregnable men from their money. See, in 1888, Bertha Stanley came to San Francisco and she visited Dr. Messing, who was the chief rabbi of Beth Israel congregation. And she told him that she was a widow, a very wealthy widow. Her first husband had been a Christian, but she wanted to marry back into her faith. So he agreed to sort of help her. And she offered $1,000 actually to the person who would find her a thoroughly acceptable Jewish husband. And she actually met Dr. Messing's brother-in-law, Abraham Gruen, who was a wealthy businessman. Now, although Bertha was described by the San Francisco Chronicle as being 40 years of age, decidedly ugly, and weighing 250 pounds, and though the newspapers made sport of her weight, describing her as elephantine, comparing her to a battleship, etc., what she lacked in looks, she made up in charisma. And Gruen fell madly in love with her and proposed to her within a few days. And soon she had charmed her way into the top social class of Beth Israel, giving a check for $1,000 to the congregation and hinting at much more to come. She was the guest of honor at numerous soirees and managed to acquire an extensive wardrobe, including jewelry, either as gifts or on credit. She told Gruen that her son, who was with her, was opposed to the marriage, and he lent Willie $500 as a way of softening him up. Then she and Willie departed to Los Angeles, pausing only to pawn the more expensive jewelry. Now, when Bertha's check bounced, Gruen became suspicious and visited the captain of detectives, Isaiah Lees. And upon hearing Bertha's description, Lees reached for a book, and I'm going to show you this book. This book is called Professional Criminals of America. And he turned to plate number 122, and it was Bertha Hayman, alias Big Bertha, Confidence Queen. The book, written in 1886, detailed her many swindles and noted that she was currently incarcerated, adding her sentence will expire in April 1887. She has the reputation of being one of the smartest confidence women in America, wrote Burns admiringly, adding, she possesses a wonderful knowledge of human nature and can deceive those who consider themselves particularly shrewd in business matters. So a warrant for her arrest was issued. They were captured in Texas and returned to San Francisco. Now, with calm confidence, she was the picture of outraged innocence, and she soon became a press favorite. And impresario Ned Foster saw an opportunity and launched Bertha into a theatrical career after bailing her out of jail. He booked her into Woodward's Garden. Woodward's Garden was around 14, it's actually where the Armory is today. It's around 14th Street in Valencia. It was a huge place for people to go to party, to picnic and had entertainment. So he booked her into it, and 18,000 people streamed in to see her and hear her paint herself as the victim in her poem, the confidence queen. I'll read you a little bit. So when vain, grasping men pant for glittering gold and find their bonanza in me, is it wicked to show up how badly they're sold and the rogues that men sometimes can be? She was actually acquitted in the trial. And then her theatrical career continued with a booking in the Bella Union, which was San Francisco's most popular music hall. And she discovered that lack of talent was absolutely no barrier to popularity. She was known as a singer who couldn't sing, a dancer who couldn't dance, and an actress who couldn't act. And she was paired with Oofty Goofty. Oofty Goofty was a Barbary Coast character who made his living as a human punching bag. This is all true. He discovered when he tried to make a career as a singer, and when a manager threw him out the door and he bounced on the sidewalk and felt no pain, he discovered his real talent. So in a stroke of comic genius, Ned Foster cast them as the title characters in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Due to Bertha's weight, the tender love scene had to be played with Oofty in the balcony and Bertha on the ground. Bertha once said, "The moment I discover a man's a fool, I let him drop. But I delight in getting into the confidence and pockets of men who think they can't be skinned. It ministers to my intellectual pride." So that's Bertha. You want some more?
Why don't you do one more and we'll talk some more, and then maybe you could do some more.
Sure. Well, what's in a name, what we call a rose back in the Shakespearean mode, by any other name would smell as sweet, from Juliet, from Romeo and Juliet. Now, Andrew John Gibson would have disagreed with Juliet. Then he would have seduced her, written Lord Capulet a bad check, and moved to Denmark to borrow money from Ophelia's father, Polonius. For Gibson, an impressive name was an occupational necessity. Andrew John Gibson, AKA Sir Harry Westwood Cooper, I think we have a picture of him somewhere. Ah, there he is. He was known as Sir Harry Westwood Cooper, also known as Surgeon Major Home, also known as Dr. Milton Abraham, also known as Ebenezer McKay. He was a most industrious con man. With a regal presence and forged documents, he cut a swath of larceny on 4 continents, leaving a trail of counterfeit checks and at least 12 swindled wives. Born in Australia in 1868, Gibson was adopted by a couple who gave him the name Ernest Charles Chadwick and moved to England. Returning to Australia, he posed as the heir to a large British fortune and married the daughter of a wealthy businessman in Sydney. And he left her after cashing some worthless checks and married a girl in Brisbane. Gibson took his new wife to London, where he abandoned her. Moving on to Toronto, he became Dr. Harry Westwood Cooper, and he used forged newspaper clippings to attest to his miraculous surgical techniques. And thus armed, he practiced medicine while delivering an occasional sermon in the church. And he ingratiated himself with his soon-to-be fleeced flock by pretending to be very ill and then showing people his will and the generous bequests they would soon get from him. Then he disappeared after borrowing large sums of money, and he arrived in San Francisco in 1897 as Sir Harry Westwood Cooper, having been knighted by the queen of his imagination. He was arrested there after forging a check on the Crocker Woolworth Bank and served 3 years in San Quentin. Upon his release, he became Dr. Milton Abrahams and repeated this following recipe: take one impressive title, add an aristocratic attitude, marinate in forged documents, stir thoroughly, pour mixture over a young heiress, add money borrowed under empty promises, remove the money and disappear. But the disappearing part he was not that great at, and he was arrested again. And even prison could not impair his connubial criminality. He seduced Teresa Van Belden, who is a wealthy Salvation Army missionary who visited the prison, and he married her under the nose of the San Francisco jailers. He promised he would reform, and she used her influence with the parole board to get him out. He soon abandoned her and fled the country. Gibson was so persuasive that his jailers were ordered not to talk with him, lest they fall under his spell. He once said, "Give me a shave and a clean shirt, and I can win the affection of any woman in the world." And I also talk about masters of escape. And they are the creme de creme of criminals. I mean, they really have to be, if you're trying to escape from a prison where they've spent millions of dollars to keep you, it takes enormous talent. You might have to design and build a 100-foot tunnel out of spare wood, run wires and lights from a stolen power source. You may have to swim a raging river. And it's, some people wonder why such gifted people don't use their ability to make a good living within the law. Now, Willie the Actor Sutton, who is a legendary 20th century bank robber, he explained, he said, "I loved it. I was more alive when I was inside a bank robbing it than at any other time in my life. I enjoyed everything about it so much that 1 or 2 weeks later, I'd be out looking for the next job. But to me, the money was the chips, that's all." So on the run, alone, outnumbered, masters of escape arouse our sympathy and admiration despite their violent crimes. No, I want to get serious and talk about education now. And a recent Department of Education survey revealed that half of American adults over the age of 16 are functionally illiterate. And nothing more clearly illustrates this than the problem of the poor quality of today's holdup notes. For example, from the Minnesota local news, bank robber nabbed after handing the teller a note that said, "Give money, I gun." This holdup note was given to the Bank of America teller that said, "This is a stick-up. Put all your money, M-U-N-Y, in this bag." Now, by comparison, compare this note, which was handed to the cashier of the San Francisco Savings Bank on March 24th, 1894. "Mr. Cashier, sir, we're ready. It's far better. After considering my deplorable circumstances, I have decided that this life is not worth living without liberal means, and therefore I am resolved to make one more effort in the high road of self-help to sustain my miserable existence. Should you not comply with my demand, I am compelled to employ my last remedy, a bottle of nitroglycerin, and to bury myself under the ruins of this building, blast to everlasting nothingness. Yours respectfully, a despondent man." Now, this is a holdup note to be proud of, I think, well written, respectful. Unfortunately, the cashier, William Herrick, did not see it this way. He reached into his desk and pulled out a gun. The despondent bank robber fired. His first shot went by Herrick's ear. His second hit Herrick's heart, killing him. But before he died, Herrick managed to get up a shot that shattered the glass in the teller's window. And Charles Melvin, the bank's bookkeeper, pulled out a gun and opened fire on the bank robber. People were much more active in these days. They didn't take this sort of passive attitude. So the bank robber dashed into Market Street toward the Mission. Bystanders pursued him. He ran up Valencia Street, stole a horse and buggy, and drove it into a blind alley on Mission and 13th Street. He abandoned the buggy, ran into the basement at 14th Street, where a crowd surrounded the house, and the police arrested him. When captured, the man was armed with 2 Smith & Wesson 44 caliber pistols, a cartridge belt with 50 rounds, a dirk knife, and carried a notebook written in code. He gave his name as William Bonnement. Police suspected otherwise and searched further to identify him. On his body was an extensive tattoo panorama, including ballet girls, cowboys, sailors, Indians, the goddess of liberty, and the American flag. And he was quickly identified as a William Frederick, a notorious outlaw who had served 4 years at Folsom Prison. And Frederick was most noted for his association with Chris Evans and John and George Sontag, who are famous train robbers of California's best-known railroad, the Southern Pacific. So that's, just another interesting person on the criminal road.
That was great.
Okay, and let me close with Sally Stanford, who also appears in the Purveyors of Sin section. And she was once the top madam in San Francisco, perhaps the country. She ended up as mayor of Sausalito. And Sally may have played a role in establishing world peace. Herb Cain claimed that the United Nations was founded at her bordello because many of the delegates attending the founding conference in June 1945 were her customers, and a large part of the actual negotiations took place in her living room. She once said, "Madaming is the sort of thing that happens to you, like getting a battlefield commission or becoming the dean of women at Stanford University." Quite a career she had, from bootlegger to madam to mayor. And I just like to close with one of her quotes. "They're a wonderful set of burglars, the people who were running San Francisco when I first came to town in 1923. Wonderful because if they were stealing, they were doing it with class and style." So, I can answer any questions you might have or any other stories.
Yeah, well, please, if anyone has any questions, please type them into the chat.
I can't hear.
You can't hear me?
No.
I didn't get that.
Okay.
Could you try again?
Somehow my computer has turned on its narration. So everything I was saying is appearing in a little window up in the corner.
Siri is joining the conversation.
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
I got rid of her.
But so you can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear
by
now.
Getting rid of her, you can hear me.
Yes.
That worked.
Yes.
Okay, good. So I was saying, first of all, anyone who has any questions for you, please type them into the chat room. So, and I have a question for you. So you had to research all these things. How did you go about researching these stories? Were they easy to find? What was that like?
Well, it is a lot easier than it used to be. I have Kevin's files, and he, when he was doing it, you have to microfiche and make copies. But now you can do a lot of it online. And a lot of what my research are the old newspapers. And it's kind of a treat to read the styling of it's much more style in the writing of the newspapers of those days. So that's where I get a lot. And I've read quite a few books on this.
So is Kevin the one that kind of gave you the ideas about who the criminals were that you needed to start researching?
Some of them, yeah. I mean, he had an extensive collection, but often I found as I was researching, it would be actually a lot of fun. I'd be reading some paper from 1892, and all of a sudden I'd see something else on the page that looked like an interesting crime, and I would sort of delve into that. But pretty much, I would say online was how I did most of my research. And then you'd also go to not the horoscopes, the family trees, and look things up. And I was able to tell some people about their ne'er-do-well uncle, which they didn't even know. I'm not sure if they appreciated it, but they know now.
Did they want to know or not? They didn't even ask.
Yeah.
But okay, so in your book, there's how many stories, and what's like the earliest year of the first crime you write about, and what's the last crime you
Earliest
write about?
year would probably be the 1860s. And the latest one would be about 100 years later, 1966. There's a couple in the 1960s. And my book is available. Well, it's available at Green Apple Books. I don't know if Green Apple Books is available. Also, the West Portal bookstore, and on Amazon. Or you can email me and I can get you a copy. And that's, yeah.
I think we had the owner of, yes, we had the owner of Green Apple Books on, and I think you would need to call and make sure, but I think you can drive up and get it, and you can still get things there. I think that's what he said. It was a couple of weeks ago, months ago, whatever. I'm kind of glad I read a great deal of your book, as much as I could, since a few days I got it. And there's some really grisly crimes in there, which I'm not sad you didn't read one of those grisly ones. When you're doing that kind of, finding those kind of really kind of awful murderers, serial killer type crimes and what they did to people, do you get any like PTSD or anything? I mean, what happens to you when you have?
That's a great question, because I think I never write about a serial killer who's still alive. I don't really want to give them that airspace and give them. I'm a little put off by all these books on serial killers. Just reading someone who's written his 6th book about Ted Bundy, and I said, really, it's a little pornographic to me. All this emphasis on these really terrible people. But in answer to your question, I think something was committed 80 or 100 years ago doesn't seem quite as bad. At least that's
so it doesn't horrify you.
No.
It just intrigues you.
It would be hard to be a crime writer if crime horrified you.
I think
like being a medical writer if you couldn't stand the sight of blood.
Gail Stickley asks, it's a wonderful show. Do you offer crime tours? And I think you do. Tell us about your crime tours.
Oh, that's right. I do the Crooks Tour of San Francisco. Of course, that's all on hold right now. But I do a tour of the Barbary Coast, and I do a tour of Chinatown. And I think when things calm down and I can do it, I'd be happy to sort of resume that, because it's, they're really wonderful areas, and Chinatown especially kind of looks the same as it did in those days. So it can be kind of an interesting place to walk around.
Tell us a little bit about certain of the spots you hit.
Okay. Well, I hit the alley in Chinatown, which was known as the Gambler's Alley. It's the oldest alley in San Francisco. And I should be telling you the name had I remembered it at this moment. Ross Alley. Oh, there it is.
Aha!
Yeah. And it was there were many gambling places on there, but it was kind of an interesting setup. You would see an old man sleeping next to the door. And but if you try to go into that door and he didn't want you, he had a rope under his robe and he would pull it, which would lock the door. And for police raids, there was another door inside that was 2 inches thick and studded with brass. And by the time the police could break into it, all evidence of gambling would have been removed. I also do go to the Chikon Tong, which is known as the mother of all tongs. It's the first tong in America, and tongs, really just mean literally associations. And, I also, when I do my tour, I say that, the vast majority of the people who live in Chinatown are very law-abiding, have done great things, but no one's interested in them. People are interested in the criminals. So that's who I talk about. There was that place played a small role in world history because in 1893, Dr. Sun Yat-sen tried a revolution in China and failed, and he fled to the United States. And the Qikongtang hid him in their various places up and down the coast until he was able to go back to China and win. And Shrimp Boy Chow was the recent leader of the Qikongtang. And I have to say, I am very proud to be Facebook friends with Shrimp Boy Chow. He's quite unusual in that most Tang leaders, most gang leaders do not want publicity, but he seems to enjoy it. But he has a lot of time to spend.
Wasn't Shrimp Boy Chong in the news within the past few years?
Yes, yeah. Well, Shrimp Boy Chow was actually, as a 17-year-old, he was one of in the Golden Dragon Massacre in 1977, he was one of the targets of the Golden Dragon Massacre.
Tell us what the Golden Dragon Massacre.
Golden Dragon Massacre, it was a fight between two Chinese gangs, and it happened after the immigration laws were changed. And a lot of people came from Hong Kong, and they established their own gangs. And there was a fight between two gangs about fireworks sales. And anyway, at about 3 a.m, 5 people came into the Golden Dragon restaurant with machine guns and killed about 6 people and wounded about 10 others. But later on, Shrimp Boy Chow was a gang leader, and he was in jail, but he testified against a larger Tang leader, Peter Chow, and he was let out of prison. And then for years, he was, he'd give money. He was kind of known as a civic leader until he was indicted by the FBI for a number of things: bribery, murder, and actually, one of the interesting things in this trial was his lawyer was, talking about how much money the FBI had spent in trying to get him, how much waste, and the FBI in their defense, one of the things he was involved with was smuggling guns. And the FBI was able to make so much money smuggling guns that they were able to pay for the whole thing.
Pay for a whole what thing? I lost
for the investigation. As working with him undercover, they had to participate in his crimes.
Oh, so they were making money as criminals.
Yes.
Wow. Well, Christine says fascinating and fantastic, and also asks, and I'm assuming it's the same Christine, what is your personal favorite story?
Oh, God. That is, that's a great question. I think, well, it might be probably the Zodiac might be my favorite story. That's in the unsolved mystery part. And I find it fascinating because it's opened an entire world of study, which is called zodiology, which is the study of the Zodiac killer. And it's become kind of like a religion. Different people have their candidate. And it's like, no, he's the one who did it. No, my guy is the one who did it. And there's been a whole raft of people who claim that their deceased father was the Zodiac killer. And it's just interesting to read about all the the different explanations and theories for who it could be. So I would say that's probably, or no, the other one I say would be the Yacht Bandits, who were two extraordinary men. They were very talented. They could write books. They could sail a ship. They could do almost anything. They could make a gun out of spare parts in the prison. But they had, what they really liked to do was rob banks. And they ended up, both of them, with two of the most accomplished men were ever executed by the state of California. And they had a very, long and kind of interesting career. I was fascinated because I'd never heard of them until I was going through, some files in a library. I mean, it's a great name. They call the Yacht Bandits because they owned a yacht, and they would sail the yacht into a city, rob the bank, go back on the yacht and sail somewhere else. And they robbed banks up and down the Pacific coast from Vancouver to San Diego.
And yachts went fast enough so they didn't get caught?
No, it's just they might have been a member of the St. Francis Yacht Club. I'm not sure about that. But that was a way that they would pose as wealthy yachtsmen. And then after the bank robbery, they would escape to another city on the yacht.
So they didn't have like a cocktail party to act like their, alibi. No, they didn't rob the bank. They were on the yacht having a cocktail party.
Yeah, well, I think they tried that, but unfortunately, the San Francisco police got a tip from Seattle, and they were able to find their apartment, which was filled with all kinds of guns and money. And that was kind of hard to explain. And actually, the person who convicted them was Earl Warren, governor of California and later Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
Wow. Well, Gloria Rosen has a question, and just wanted to kudos to Gloria. She performed last night in Solo Arts Heels and had a wonderful performance. And if anybody wants to see that show, it's up on our website now. But Gloria says, your stories are fascinating. Would you ever be interested in researching the crime scene of Hell's Kitchen in the days when it was really bad? I think Gloria comes from New York, back from where you used to be.
Sure. I have researched, since I'm from New York, I have done some research. Yeah, Hell's Kitchen, there's the Westies. It has another great crime history. But I do know about the West Side, and Oni Madden was kind of the great Irish criminal who he led a number of gangs. He was sent away for 10 years, and he came back during bootlegging times, and he managed to be quite successful. And then he moved to Hot Springs, Arkansas, and he had a hotel there, and it became known as a place to hide out. So he had a lot of very satisfied criminal clients. He was an interesting person. But yeah, the West Side crime were more of the Irish, and they did a lot of robbing from the trains and also the ships. Yeah, so I do know. Actually, I have recently written a story, not about them, but about in the crime movies, you see this criminal who's saying, "Come and get me, coppers." And there is actually a couple of cases that inspired these movies of these sort of lone gunmen who stand off the police, and then thousands of people are in the street watching this thing. And they're kind of interesting cases.
Yeah. So one more question, then I'm going to do another question, then we're done. Can you believe it? So Nina asks, what percentage are males versus female criminals? Do you have like a general statistic that you know, or do you have a statistic at least from your book?
I wouldn't. I'd say in my book, it's about 4 to 1. But I do have
Four females to one male?
4 males to 1 female.
I thought
But
so. I
they
was
are-
just kidding.
Yes, but their females are pretty interesting and pretty tough.
The ones that are criminals are interesting and tough.
Yes, yes.
Unlike the rest of us boring non-criminal females.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So what are you working on now?
I am working on some additional stories that take place not necessarily in San Francisco. I'm working on now is one about, it could be called the first Zodiac, but it was a story from the 1920s about this. He was a very successful astrologer, and he had been crippled in a car accident, and he managed to brainwash his 16-year-old nephew into carrying out the crimes. And he had this whole plan of killing 15 or 20 people and then, inheriting the money. Fortunately, he wasn't quite as successful, and he was caught after only 1. But it's quite an interesting story.
Wow. So we have come to the end of our time. I want you all to know that we knew about Paul Drexler because he came to one of our bingo nights.
Right.
And he won. He won a bingo. And because his name went up, because he won, people knew who he was. And they said, wow, that's Paul Drexler. We love his book.
Right.
So do you think?
It was a very, very exciting night. One of the most exciting nights of my life. And I think, when we were looking for something to do, and Josh Kornbluth playing bingo. I mean, when I think of bingo, I have to say that Josh is probably like one of the few names that come to mind.
Really? Is there another name that comes to mind?
Yes, let's see. Ricky Jay would be one. And who was that priest in Russia in about 1916? Anyway.
For bingo? For bingo?
No, yeah. I thought he would be an interesting caller, bingo.
Well, we hope to see you at bingo again some night. Tomorrow night you can come and wear a, somebody said Rasputin.
Yes, that was the one, Rasputin.
Parrots Wolf Prusen said Rasputin. Hello, Parrots.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. I hope you'll join us at bingo. Tell us the name of your book one more time.
Notorious San Francisco, True Tales of Crime, Passion, and Murder. And it can be bought on Amazon or local bookstores, hopefully.
Well, we look forward to it. We look forward to being able to go back out there, and I'm going to get, a crime tour with you because
Absolutely.
I didn't ask you one. I'm going to ask you one more question because any crimes on Valencia Street where the Marsh is?
But I can't. I have crimes everywhere. But I have to. I don't have anything off the top of my head. But I'm sure there are some interesting crimes.
So will you let me know?
Absolutely. Name me. Yeah. If anyone has a part of the city they like, just send it in, and I'll tell you who killed who there. It's always nice to know about your history.
And what did you say? Is there a website or a?
Yes, crookstour.com is one of my websites, and you can see the book there. I also have some of the other stories that I've written for the Examiner there, and it has some information about the tour, which hopefully will be given again in the next year or so. Who knows?
And that is in our chat if you want that website. And also, do you have an email address if
Yes,
that you want?
it's P Drexler, the number 8 at gmail.com.
So P Drexler, the number 8
At
at gmail.com. All right. So if you
Yes.
have any more questions for Paul or want to find out about crime in your particular house, I read this. I lived in Buffalo, and 20 years later, I read this whole article about how the house I lived in was haunted. You never know what's happening and where you were.
That's
where
true.
you were. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for joining me at Stephanie's MarshStream. It was wonderful, fun, fascinating. Thank you so much. Hope to see you at Bingo. Hope to see you all come back again next week and see Fred Pitts. He's done a performance about missions around the California and what it's like to go as a Black man to these missions. He's also a doctor. So we can find out maybe some information on COVID from him if he wants to talk to us about it. And join us for all our other shows as well. Go to our website. Don't forget, give us a tip. Keep us alive as our theaters are shuttered, but our MarshStream is blossoming. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming tonight, and stay healthy and well and good spirits until we see each other again. Bye now. Thank you very much.